This video is sponsored by CryptoCompare. CryptoCompare.com.
Last month, the New York Times, a former newspaper, published a story titled "Wanted in China, More Male Teachers to Make Boys Men." Now, why would the Marxist government want this? And why now? The New York Times, unsurprisingly, doesn't ask these hard questions. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Okay, so the NYT article is very long, link is in the low bar, so I'm going to read only a portion of it and then expand to where the New York Times doesn't. So buckle up, because this is an important topic that cannot fit into 10 minutes, so this will be quite long. Anyway, quote, "Lead Wei, 27, is one of a handful of male 6th grade teachers at a primary school here, has made a habit of telling stories about warlords who threw witches into rivers and soldiers who outsmarted Japanese troops. Men have special duties," he said. "They have to be brave, protect women, and take responsibility for wrongdoing." Worried that a shortage of male teachers has produced a generation of timid, self-centered, and effeminate boys, Chinese educators are working to reinforce traditional gender roles and values in the classroom. In Zhengzhou, a city on the Yellow River, schools have asked boys to sign pledges to act like real men. In Shanghai, principals are trying boys-only classes with courses like martial arts, computer repair, and physics. In Hangzhou, in eastern China, educators have started a summer camp called West Point Boys, complete with taekwondo classes and the motto, "We bring out the men in boys." Education officials across China are aggressively recruiting male teachers as the Chinese news media warns of a need to salvage masculinity in schools. The call for a more male-oriented education has prompted a broader debate about gender equality and social identity at a time when the country's leaders are seeking to make the labor market more meritocratic. It also reflects a general anxiety about boys in Chinese society. While boys outnumber girls as a result of the long-standing one-child policy and the cultural preference for sons, they constantly lag in academic performance. Some parents worry about their sons' prospects in an uncertain economy, so they are putting their hopes in male role models who they believe impart lessons on assertiveness, courage, and sacrifice. The view that there is an overabundance of female teachers that has had a negative effect on boys has, perhaps predictably, led to a backlash. Parents have accused schools of propagandizing rigid concepts of masculinity and gender norms, and female educators have denounced efforts to attract more male teachers with lavish perks as sexist. Now, for the record, this last paragraph is complete and utter bollocks. The idea that there are swaths of Chinese parents who talk in terms like rigid concepts of masculinity and gender norms is ludicrous in and of itself. But then again, cultural projection is bad only when conservatives do it. When the New York Times does it, it's fine and dandy. Anyway, let's read a bit more and then I'll explain. Quote, "In Fuzhou, a city of 2 million, colleges and universities have come under fire for relaxing admissions requirements and offering full scholarships and teaching jobs to young men. In some schools, teachers said the large number of female educators, especially in lower grades, had a positive influence on students." And now listen to the female entitlement speaking. Quote, "We have a more intuitive sense of children's needs," says Li Yue, 36, a kindergarten teacher in Fuzhou. But of course, the idea that men may have a more intuitive sense of how machine works is sexist. Anyway, quote, "It isn't the responsibility of schools to teach boys to be boys, it's the responsibility of parents." Now that's true, but when you hold them all to feminine standards of behavior, how should the parents cope? Anyway, quote, "Chinese education officials for the most part appear to disagree. While men are scarce among the ranks of public school teachers worldwide, including in the United States, the gender imbalance is especially pronounced in China, where women occupy 4 out of 5 teaching positions in urban areas, according to a 2012 study by Beijing Normal University. In some districts, school officials have pressured local officials to intervene, saying that students are underperforming because they lack male role models. Boys consistently trail girls on college entrance exams, and disparities in academic achievement emerge as early as 3rd grade, according to a 2012 study by the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences. In recent years, education officials in Fujian, Guangxi, and Jiangsu have created incentives for male teachers, arguing that men bring an energetic style that appeals to boys. Still, it is not clear that children derive academic benefits from studying with teachers of the same sex. A 2008 study of 9,000 11-year-olds in Britain found no tie between male teachers and higher academic performance among boys. Again, notice the spin of the New York Times. Even if you don't believe that more male teachers are needed, the New York Times' attempt at spinning the reality in China is blatantly obvious. The 2008 British study that shows what the feminists at the New York Times wanted to show is in no way relevant to the issue at hand. Just like the US National Longitudinal Study spanning from 1988 to 2000, which shows that excessive female teachers downgrades boys' performance on all disciplines, the harshest impact being on mathematics and English. That study is also not relevant for the issue at hand, even if it supports my position. No matter how politically incorrect this may sound, Britain and the US simply are way too different in way too many aspects. But then again, acknowledging any difference of any kind is anathema for the citizens of the world at the New York Times, for whom Britain and China are comparable. Anyway, let's read a few more paragraphs. Quote, Shanghai No. 8 Senior High School began all-boys program for 60 students in 2012 with the goal of reviving the masculinity of its male students. Zhu Jianhao, 18, a senior student at the school, said he did not think China faced a masculinity crisis in its classrooms, but he said boys felt more confident when they took classes together. The school offers courses in etiquette, coding, and wilderness survival, among others. In classes with female students, we might not dare to speak out, he said. When it's just boys, we feel much better. Sun Yunjiao, a researcher at the China Youth and Children Research Center and the author of a book on education titled Save the Boys, said Chinese students were increasingly distant from male role models, including their fathers. Children need both female teachers and male teachers for their development, Mr. Sun said. A major obstacle to luring more men into teaching are the modest wages paid to educators in China, as elsewhere in the world. Okay, skipping a bit. Of the million or so kindergarten teachers and instructional aides across China, about 60,000 or 6% are male, government statistics show. Retention of male teachers is a serious challenge in China, and many male educators complain that they are lonely and disrespected. Fujian Normal University admitted its first class of male students, teachers, and under the tuition-free program last fall. Each day, they study up to 12 hours under the guidance of female professors who coach them in reading body language and showing empathy. Because they are expected to be in high demand, they are required to gain certification in a number of subjects, including English, math, and science. Wang Ningde, 19, said he hoped to teach Chinese in an elementary school, but he said he was concerned about the perception in some schools that male teachers were untrustworthy. If we have only women as teachers, he said, we will still have many problems. Now the article goes on a bit more, but we get the gist. Now, in order to pass any sort of judgment, one needs to first know a thing or two about China. And sadly, the portions that are relevant are rarely told. Anyway, for starters, the single-party communist state is, well, not exactly that communist, not exactly that single-party, and increasingly less totalitarian, though still far from my standards of acceptability. This is complicated, so please bear with me. Back when I was in school, there was a catchphrase about China. One country, two systems. But now it's more like one country, four or five systems. Within China, there are provinces administered more like the Mao era, such as Guizhou, which outside of its capital, Guiyang, which is a special economic zone, still relies on the old-style Bolshevik forced industrialization economic model where mining and mammoth state-owned factories are the norm and the GDP per capita is marginally better than North Korea's. On the other hand, there are places like Shenzhen in the Guangdong province where the amount of wealth per capita and the standard of living slightly outstrips most of the European Union. Somewhere between these two are places like Sichuan where the administration is old-style commie but the market is freer than in France, though less free than in Poland and the United States. And if that's not complicated enough, toss in the special, mostly self-governing provinces of Macau and Hong Kong, and the autonomous provinces where Chinese culture and language doesn't apply. And this part is important because Huangji is one of those autonomous provinces, and New York Times mentions this one as if it's the norm for China. Except it isn't. In Guangxi, people speak the Zhuang language, which is a modern Thai language, and the culture in the area is quite different than the Confucian tradition of most of mainland China. Told you this is complicated. So, having learned this, it's better to look at China as a relatively diverse de facto federal republic rather than a unitary Bolshevik state. Oh, and if you want to make things even more complicated, look up the factions within the Communist Party. Factions that are so entrenched that the Great National Assembly resembles more of a multi-party aristocratic assembly than a unitary commie dictatorship as we used to know in Eastern Europe. One of the factions is even called the Crown Prince Party, or the Princeling faction, and is currently the ruling one in China. And no, I'm not joking. Now, why does this matter, and what's that got to do with male teachers and teaching boys to be men? Well, it matters because culture matters. And without understanding at least the basics of how a culture and society functions, there's no way you can properly assess things, let alone judge them. But then again, the multiculturalists of today no longer need to know all these, as opposed to the multiculturalists of my generation who actually spend time to study the things they're talking about. Now, before getting to the questions asked in the intro, one also needs to understand another aspect about China. As opposed to other former or current communist societies, China absolutely did not adopt feminism, neither at a cultural level nor at a legislative level. Whereas other commie states did experiment with forced sex quotas in various industries and tried to promote the social construct progressivist nonsense, China did no such thing. Even more than that, a few years ago, the Chinese Supreme Court amended the divorce laws in order to curtail women's hypergamous behavior of gaming the system to get men's homes following frivolous divorces. You won't see such thing anytime soon anywhere in the West. And while the New York Times tries to spin this as if it's some sort of feminist awakening is occurring in China, yes, that's how clueless the New York Times is, the reality is exactly the opposite. There's intense crackdown on any sort of feminist/cultural Marxist manifestation, and that is no accident. The elites of China may be ruthless authoritarian scumlords with a chip on their shoulders and with a debatable understanding of economics, but they're not idiots. They know damn well that feminism is a useful tool to undermine and eventually take down a society. And they also know damn well that they don't want that in their backyard. And who can blame them? Given the large population of China, a social revolution of such magnitude would not only wipe out the current government, but would also severely undermine the relative peace and stability of the region. A short look at the map should let anyone know how unpleasant it would be if China would go full Sweden and adopt a feminist foreign policy and tear down indiscriminately the heavily masculine bastions of the society, like Sweden does. Now you can rally against traditionalism or gender norms and whatnot as much as you want, but at the end of the day, with all their trade-offs and stupidities and yes, oppression, these are still preferable to the misandric relativism that comes with adopting gender-bending feminism. I know that's harsh to admit, but it's nonetheless true. Having said that, we can now finally ask, why would the Marxist government want more male teachers in schools, and why now? Part of the answer has already been provided when I said that the Chinese elites aren't idiots. They can read the writing on the wall, and they can also look around the world, unlike most American academic elites who can rarely see outside America, and when they do, they look to the worst examples like Sweden or Canada. The other part of the answer is that China does have a strong tendency towards copying the West. Heck, even the current ruling system is in part copied from the West, more precisely from the United States, as China moves slowly towards a federalist model. However, lately China and its elites have also learned to adapt whatever ideas they import to the local conditions, as they realize that whenever they do that, stability is more likely to accompany the rising prosperity. In this context, the originators of this idea of bringing more male teachers in the classrooms have most definitely studied the situation in the West, and they didn't like what they have seen. Also, with the rising prosperity started in the late 70s and accentuated in the last 20 years, also came in a generation of youngsters that are far less like their fathers and even less like their grandfathers. This generation, that is now 18 to 24 years of age, has traveled more than their parents and grandparents combined. This generation is also a lot less willing to believe in the state's official dogma, an aspect shown through the increasingly high prevalence of breaking the state's censorship on the internet, or through the increasingly high numbers of young Christians, including in the high ranks of the Communist Party. And that is a no small thing, as the Chinese Communist Party is the largest officially atheist organization in the world. And in the spirit of adapting, that is why the New York Times tells us about the male teacher telling stories about sacrifice in battle against the Japanese with shouts of "Long live the Communist Party." The Chinese elites are trying to, if you pardon my expression, marry traditionalism with the state's official dogma, just like Herbert Marcuse and others like him tried in the West to marry the culture with Marxism. That is why a Marxist government tries these things. Now, as for why now, well, because now the need has become a lot more prevalent. In the past, even those who did travel a lot and had a more middle-class and dissenting lifestyle from the state's ideal still got positive reinforcements from the surrounding and/or influencing cultures. But now that's no longer the case at all. Imagine you're a young, confused Chinese boy. Where do you get masculine role models, especially if your father is all day at work? Serious question. At school, you're held at feminine standards of behavior and learning. If you break the taboo and consume Japanese mainstream culture, that is also heavily feminized, or at least drastically unmasculine. If you look in India, you get straight-up gynocentric bigotry as the norm. If you look in Europe, same thing. Your only chance is older US movies about the South, but that's hard to come by anyway, since relating to that is in no way easy. Again, culture matters. Now, will the elites succeed in marrying traditionalism with the state's dogma? I don't really think so. And I don't think so because the state's dogma itself is collapsing culturally. It's not yet entirely visible, but it's there if you look at long-term trends. And traditionalism cannot avert that collapse. So under these conditions, there are three possible outcomes. 1. Nothing meaningful changes, which is the least likely possibility. 2. Traditionalism makes a huge return, which is likely but not extremely likely to happen. And 3. Traditionalism will serve as good balance at keeping more severe manifestations of gynocentrism from emerging in the void left empty by the slow and painful collapse of the state's dogma. Personally, I think a mixture between 2 and 3 is likely to happen. Now, whether that's a good thing or not is a separate discussion in which I won't get into now, but one thing is for sure, the move in itself, while it does have some serious flaws in the way it's conceived, is a positive trade-off, at least in the short run. I know it's politically incorrect nowadays to say this, but men, young and old, relate better with each other if they are mission-focused as opposed to feelings-focused. So all-boys classes with male teachers on things like wilderness survival or coding and things of that nature are more than welcomed and bound to make an immediate positive impact. You know, they say that those who put equality before liberty get neither, while those who put liberty before equality get quite a good dose of both. Well, the same thing applies here when working with men and boys. Those who put feelings before strength and mission get neither, while those who put strength and mission before feelings will get a quite good dose of both. And with that being said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you around on Freedom Alternative.